Good evening. Good evening, all. Welcome to the Queens Public Library. My name is Dennis Walcott, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight. And really, this is an outstanding gathering on an extremely important topic, so I will keep my remarks extremely brief. But the one thing I always like to talk about with Queens Public Library is that we are the crossroads for all populations to come through our doors and receive services. I was just sharing a story this morning on how we had like four things converging as soon as we opened our door. We had asylum seekers coming here to get their IDs. We had children coming from school to have children's story time. We had people coming here to get ESOL classes, and then we had another group of individuals coming here for high school equivalency classes as well. And that's not counting our regular library services for computer services and books and sitting down and really just being the true equal opportunity for all people. As we like to say, we speak your language, and we're here to do that. And so this forum is extremely important in making sure we talk about the issue of equity and what it means, and making sure we have experts to share that information with you. So while Nicole Hunt will introduce the panelists, with Nicole's permission, I'd just like to do one little thing off script, because in addition to our panelists, God bless you, one of the panelists is someone who I just have to single out, so I won't get in trouble, but more importantly, it's just a person who I've known for a number of years. She represents us in Washington, D.C. She is always there for the Queens Public Library, and I sincerely mean that, because the Congresswoman has just been just so steadfast for us. And I don't know if you've been to the district in the last several days to see what happened at the Flushing Library, but we had a major project where we took down the air conditioning system, put in a new one, and had cranes there. And the Flushing Library is the biggest probably public library in the country, where we average roughly 5,000 people a day who come through our doors. And it's represented by our great Congresswoman, Grace Meng. So I just need to be bad for 1 second to say thank you to the Congresswoman for everything that you do, not just for the Queens Public Library, but for all of us around the country. So now it's my pleasure to bring up Nicole Hunt, who is the Associate Director of Public Policy, who will in turn introduce the panelists. Nicole? And I want to thank Scott McLeod. Scott is our Director of Volunteer Services. Scott has been doing an outstanding job with the food bank. We offer food pantry services together at our public libraries, and the food bank has been truly fantastic. So Nicole, thank you for everything on behalf of the Queens Public Library, and the mic is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Walcott, and the entire Queens Public Library team for the warm welcome and the support you've provided to help make this event possible. We're so honored to be here in this incredible central branch and in all of your company today. While primarily known as a hunger relief organization, Food Bank for New York City has long understood that the New Yorkers we serve have needs that go beyond food, and that includes access to personal hygiene products, baby formula, diapers, and other essential items. Menstrual products are both necessary and expensive. In a national survey, 1 in 5 teens struggle to afford period products. In fact, nearly a third of Food Bank's member agencies distribute personal hygiene products beyond food. That's why Food Bank established the Woman to Woman Initiative in 2016, spearheaded by board member Katie Lee Beagle, to address those inequities and obstacles for the estimated 1 million women and girls facing poverty and food insecurity in New York City. This campaign seeks to educate the public, advocate for policy change, and raise critical funds to provide much-needed period products, hygiene essentials, and childcare necessities through our community-based network. In 2022, Woman to Woman helped our organization provide 1.4 million pounds of household and personal care items to New Yorkers in need, including over 200,000 pounds of period products, such as pads, liners, tampons, menstrual kits, and period underwear, and almost 400,000 pounds of hygiene essentials like shampoo, conditioner, body lotion, and soap. New York City is a leader on this issue. In 2016, we became the first locality in the United States to introduce and pass a groundbreaking package of menstrual equity bills. But there's more to be done. We are so excited about our panelists, who will touch on some of these issues and more. Now, please join me in welcoming them. Our moderator tonight is Alicia Haridasani, did I do that right? Gupta is a New York Times reporter on the Well Desk, focused on women's health, health inequities, and trends in functional medicine and wellness. Congresswoman Grace Meng is serving her 6th term in the United States House of Representatives, where she represents New York's 6th congressional district right here in Queens. Congresswoman Meng's Menstrual Equity for All Act is a pioneering legislation package to help expand access to free menstrual products. Oh, and now we are joined by Dr. Wendy Wilcox.
Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. Who is the Chief Women's Health Officer for New York City Health and Hospitals. Dr. Wilcox is a longtime advocate for women and women's health and is responsible for the strategic development of the Women's Health Service Line. Carrington Baker is founder and CEO of For Women by Women, period. Since starting this organization, Carrington and her team have distributed over 100,000 products across New York City and New Jersey areas. She is a recent college graduate from St. John's University right here in Queens and is currently preparing for medical school to be an OBGYN. Attorney, advocate, and author Jennifer Weiss-Wolf is the executive director of NYU Law's Birnbaum Women's Leadership Network. Her 2017 book, Periods Gone Public, Taking a Stand for Menstrual Equity, was lauded by Gloria Steinem as the beginning of liberation for us all. Her forthcoming book, Period, Full Stop, The Politics of Menopause, will be published by NYU Press in 2025. So we should all bookmark that. Please give them a round of applause. We're so excited for this conversation and to have them all here. And now I'm turning the mic over to Alicia.
Thank you. Thanks, Nicole. I am so honored, actually, to be sharing this stage with such fantastic panels. And I don't think anyone heard, but Congresswoman Meng looked at me and said, I wish I was doing more with my life. That's how fantastic this panel is. Me too, actually. I concur with that. I just want to build on what Nicole was saying. The term period poverty refers to the inability to afford menstrual products like pads or tampons. And it also refers to the lack of access to safe and clean bathrooms, waste management tools, and education around menstruation. So in other words, period poverty really boils down to the inability to menstruate with dignity. According to some estimates, 2 in 5 people in the US struggle to purchase period products in 2021. So it's happening here in the United States. It's not some far-fetched, far-flung phenomenon. Over a third of low-income women reported missing work, school, or other events due to their lack of access to period products. And here's the kicker. There is currently no government program that helps cover the cost of period supplies. It is not covered by SNAP, for example, or Medicaid. Which actually brings me to Congresswoman Meng, who in 2021 introduced the Menstrual Equity for All Act in Congress and is about to reintroduce it this month. So I would just like to start with what this act would do and what kind of support you anticipate for it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Queens Library. Thank you to Food Bank for putting together this amazing event. I'm so impressed to be included on this panel, but my comment was especially to Carrington at her young age, how accomplished she is, and just really grateful for each and every one of you. This legislation is really exciting. When I first introduced it a few years ago, people were like, what are you talking about? Many of my colleagues, even women, felt a little nervous and felt like it was a taboo topic to discuss on the House floor. The last time we introduced it, we had over 100 co-sponsors, which is many more than the previous years that we had introduced it. Although I'm certain, because I actually witnessed one colleague start running away when I started to talk about this topic and say the word period. So I think some people probably signed on because they wanted me to stop talking about periods on the House floor. But I hope that we will continue to grow support for this bill and maybe even get bipartisan support. This bill is really something that is an attempt to be very comprehensive, from everything from large companies to public buildings, to making sure that we are able to alleviate period poverty in the places where it's most impacted. We have been able to work in Congress, for example, to ensure that in our federal prison systems that people have access to these products. My first ever time working on this issue was actually with Jennifer, as we worked to ensure that New York City public school kids would be able to get these products for free. And so it's very exciting, and I actually first learned about period poverty from a 7th grade girl who wrote a letter to me. I never thought about this issue before, and I want to thank advocates like this young 7th grader who first brought it to my attention. So basically, we're trying to pass this federal piece of legislation to make these products available to more people.
So I think one crucial element of that is that it would make Medicaid cover period supplies. Is that correct?
Yes.
Why is period supplies currently not covered or seen as an essential health product right now?
A lot of times people who need these products the most, and this is something that honestly, when I first thought about this issue, I thought it was something that, okay, maybe women and girls in underdeveloped countries, that this was something that impacted them. But I realized as I learned more about this issue that there are people right here in America, right here in our own city, who are not able to access it. We have girls, for example, skipping school every month for like a week when they get their period. So oftentimes it's the people who need it the most who are not able to access these products. We actually were, so yes, we want it included in Medicaid. We were able to work on a bipartisan basis about 2 years ago to get it included in products that if you have a health or flexible savings account, you can now buy these products, pre-tax dollars. And so that's one change that we've been able to make through government.
So what is the reason that it's not sort of seen as an essential item?
Well, periods are a very taboo topic, right? And even when we're talking about, for example, the health and flexible savings accounts, those are for medical necessities, right? And items that are luxury items or items of privilege are not included. But I don't have to tell anyone, especially in this room, that getting your period, something that over 50% of our population experience, is not something that we can control. Pads and tampons are not a luxury. This is something that we need. And so it's just sort of changing the public perception and education that this is something just like toilet paper, just like soap that is provided free of charge in most public bathrooms. This is something that we just have to change the mentality in this country.
Yeah, that actually brings me to Jennifer. You coined the term menstrual equity. Can you expand what that means and how you came to coin it?
Sure, and is this on? Can folks hear me? Really so good to be in all of your company tonight. And it's funny, this like coinage of a phrase, because it was never intended to be a phrase or something that a movement would rally around. And it was interesting to hear you sort of break down all of the aspects of period poverty, which is another very popularly used phrase. But when I started doing this work, which is going back almost 10 years now, I guess it was in 2015, and I was really thinking about what it would take to create a public policy agenda and momentum around that particular avenue for change. And remember, there can be lots of ways we can make change when it comes to menstruation and destigmatizing menstruation and ensuring that people's needs are met. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about this panel here, is that we're all doing it through different avenues. But I was a policy wonk, and that was what I wanted to do, was figure out what the policy avenue could be. And as I was learning and studying, sort of how this issue has been treated around the world, I was finding that most of the ways it was talked about, I didn't think would be successful in terms of getting public leaders' interest. Globally, there's a phrase or an acronym called WASH, Water, Sanitation, and Hygiene, which is how this issue has been addressed internationally. And I thought about that, and I thought, okay, well, our lawmakers here won't even know what that means. Like that won't resonate. And I thought about it as a public health issue and a human rights issue, and it is all of those things. But we don't do our lawmaking through those lenses. And so it struck me, especially because of the kind of work I do that's not menstruation focused, which is very much around systems of democracy and justice, that this was an equity issue. It is an equity issue, but I thought that would be something that would resonate with lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, actually. So it was very much intended to be a narrow policy frame, a way to sort of read between the lines or wiggle a way in. And I thought that if we talked about equitable participation in one's education, equitable participation in the economy, equitable participation in civic life and democracy, that was something that would resonate with lawmakers who were Republican, lawmakers who were Democratic. And in state legislatures, I have to say that's been true. That's really actually been the outcome. The laws that Congresswoman Meng has been advancing federally have also had a lot of legs in state legislatures, and we've seen period products in schools, period products in public buildings and public budgets, in jails and prisons, have a lot of success in state legislatures. And it's not that I credit it to the phrase menstrual equity, but I do credit it to the idea that that was part of the communication from the get-go. And later, if there's time, I'll talk about some real successes with I guess I should indicate that what the other side of the aisle is for me. So my successes in working with Republican legislators are real, and it's not just been around period-related laws, but it's enabled them when they've engaged in it to see more broadly how equity issues play out, whether it's about equal pay, whether it's about other, aspects of our lives. They've had sort of an eye-opening. I'll say one other thing, which is that we're in a very different political climate right now, and even the phrase menstrual equity has fallen prey to the culture wars going on in state legislatures. And in just last week or a couple weeks ago, a state legislature in Idaho rejected a free period products bill, and Republican lawmakers, women Republican lawmakers, and part of their killing of the bill was indicating that phrases like menstrual equity and period poverty were too woke, and it bringing in a nanny state and things that we really haven't heard in this work. So it's very, very concerning, and something we can talk about too.
Right. Actually, I was going to say, aside from legislation, what Congresswoman Meng touched on and what I would like you to expand on is the perception of what menstrual equity is and the other kind of roadblocks to getting there.
Well, the perception has been very positive. I would say that even with the folks who might run away from you on the House floor, and I'm sorry to hear they don't know what they're missing. I was probably, I would say, a little surprised, not stunned, and gratified that this agenda took off as it did. I remember the first piece that I wrote was in a large newspaper in the New York Times, and I was bracing myself for the nasty comments after I wrote it, and they never came. People were really glad to have this illumination, and like all of us, said, "Oh my gosh, it's not something I'd ever thought about before." And that's really been the reception. I remember at one of the sort of heyday moments for this work too, maybe like 2017 or 2018. One of the comedy shows, it was like Trevor Noah or something, called, and they were looking for a guest who would come on as an anti-voice, as an opposition voice, and they couldn't find one. And I was like, that's the best news I've heard all day. I don't have one for you either. So it's actually been very well embraced. It's been bipartisan in the states, and that's everything from eliminating sales tax on menstrual products to ensuring that public budgets are used for them in schools and jails and prisons, in shelters, in public buildings. And that's that's what the agenda has looked like as a policy agenda for menstrual equity. Is that what menstrual equity is? Not really. It's a much broader idea that menstruation and the things we don't talk about and the things that cause implicit or explicit bias have to be shaken out to ensure an equitable society. So I think I have a much grander vision for menstrual equity than just products or just sales tax. They're all pieces of a puzzle. But again, the fact that, I don't know if folks have read about in Florida where there's a lot of regressive legislation going through the system now. One of their regressive sex ed bills has the impact of restricting discussion, sheer discussion about menstruation, or among students with teachers, with school nurses, with each other. How it's taught, if it shows up in a book. There's lots of literature where menstruation shows up. After all, it is part of the lives of half of the population. And this is all being shut down. It's being called the Don't Say Periods bill. And that's the nickname. It's not really what it's called. Again, it's all part of this, I think, new growing drumbeat when it comes to key issues around health and education and inclusivity, that it's all part of some evil agenda on the left. And it's really concerning. It was really concerning to me to see free period products bills getting folded into that and shut down on that account.
I want to move to Carrington in a second, but before we get there, how do you respond to that kind of pushback?
It's funny, I actually had to respond. I did an NPR show in Florida, and I keep joking. I don't actually remember if it was Jody from Gainesville, but that's what I keep calling her in my head. Jody from Gainesville called and said, "Why am I so obsessed with trying to sexualize children?" That was the response to wanting to ensure that period education and period products were available for students to learn. I really do just turn back to these core pillars of this. This is about participation. This is about equity. This is about ensuring that we all have the same opportunities. And if somebody doubts that, it doesn't take too much research to read, what is really happening. And again, happening here at home, happening in Florida, happening in New York City, not happening across the globe, as if that's okay. But really, it is a domestic concern. It is a domestic issue. And I usually will also respond that if people have an issue with talking about menstruation, that they're the problem. Simple as that.
Yeah. Carrington, who is 22 years old, everybody, and has done more than I'm ever going to do in my life. Can you please talk about why and how you started this organization for women, by women, period?
Yes, I know. It's a mouthful. When I made the name of the organization, did not think about how hard it would be to say it, but it just hit me, and I was like, I called my dad, I was like, this has to be the name, and it stuck. But I was a junior at St. John's University, and I started it, honestly, by I watched a YouTube video, truthfully. I watched a YouTube video about the experience of homeless women in New York City, actually, with their periods. And I was watching it, and I was just I had so many emotions. I was angry, I was disgusted, I was like, how is this happening? Then I realized even myself, even when I've donated to different organizations and stuff, I never thought about period products. Even though I've menstruated now for 10 years or whatever, never thought about actually giving menstrual products. And that kind of was something I was like, you know what? Maybe I can do something about this and actually be proactive and change it within my community. Did not think on what scale that would have been. And it kind of just went from there. It was just I did so much research. I was like, how do I even get started on this? Where do we get products from? How do we do this? What does it also mean to give people period products? Because you see there is amazing laws that have been passed that are providing products to those who are in need. But the thing that's kind of sad is that there's not enough almost. You get probably 3 pads or something, when 3 pads can be someone's 3 hours or whatever. So it's just the next thing we thought about was, okay, how are we going to get enough products to these people that are in need? And from there, I started talking to my friends who are just as amazing as I am, I honestly think, because they were literally so excited, and also their perception of it was yeah, let's do it. Let's do this. Let's figure out how we're going to do this. Also, it's fun for us young people to think about it in a different, I guess, lens, pretty much, because there there is amazing organizations that exist, but I didn't really see any organizations that I guess were the Gen Z crowd. And that kind of pushed me to like make it my own and do something different.
I think a large part of your work is involves erasing the stigma around periods. And, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you come across?
There's been, honestly, ones I expected and some I did not expect. I'm not from up in New York, so everywhere where I'm from is the South. The overall conversation around periods is don't talk about it. You really didn't really get any sexual education back then, and even I found with the girls that are in the organization, we all had a similar experience with what our periods were, and it was don't talk about it, you're gonna bleed, don't tell anyone, but keep it to yourself. And then from there, we all start to fall into those stigmas as well because society kind of pushed us to do it. I know we talked about it earlier, like hiding your tampon in your sleeve to go to the bathroom, or I know I do it, still do, like opening a pad in the bathroom and like coughing so no one hears you opening it. Like that is just stuff I've seen that's just like the bare minimum. And then when you really get into it, different cultural backgrounds have different perceptions of periods. Some see it as an amazing thing and it's like you're a woman now, but others see it as don't tell anyone, you're unpure, you're now experiencing menstruation, you're a woman now, which means you can have sex, which is not what that means. I mean, like I was 11 when I first got my period, was not ready to have sex at that time, but a lot of people really think that, okay, you're a full-grown woman, figure it out from there, and you're kind of alone. And even during our distributions, we've seen women of color especially turn down products that they definitely needed, but they turned them down because they're worried about who may have been watching them get those products. And that has been something that's been really upsetting because it's just like, you're in need, you definitely want them, but because society has told you don't talk about your period, men shouldn't know about your period and stuff, you never really, I don't know, you aren't seeking out the help that you actually need.
Yeah, so does it surprise you with what Jennifer said, about the reaction of it being seen as a woke thing?
Yes, and then also it's kind of like, to me, I guess, it is a woke thing, I guess, to talk about your periods. Even like I talked to my mom, she's in the organization, she's our older person who has a different perspective, I guess you could say. But she even said, like, I've never talked about my period this much ever. And it is, I guess, woke, but I feel like it's a positive woke, not a negative woke. It's like a good thing we should be talking about our periods because, like, no one would be here in this room at all if we didn't have periods. No one would exist, actually. And it's something that we should all be able to openly express and talk about and just understand that this is what women are going through, and it is not an easy thing for some people. Some have the best periods, some have the absolute worst periods, and that's something else we should really get into, I feel like.
I think that brings me nicely to Dr. Wilcox. How are you?
Good.
Not
How
so
are you?
flustered.
It's been an
Made it in
adventure.
time. Yes, yes.
Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay, good. Thanks.
Give us a sense of the landscape here in New York. What do you think are the biggest challenges when it comes to menstrual equity here?
Sure. Well, first I'm going to take a deep breath and say thank you for inviting me. I appreciate the Queens Public Library and Food Bank of New York City for having me on this amazing panel. Being an OBGYN, I guess I'm probably the one person who people really do talk to about their periods. So I hear it a lot during my day. But you're right. It's usually in the setting of one-to-one, right, and not in public. This is a really important issue, and I'm so glad you invited me to be on this panel so that now I'm going to start talking about it and start getting it through the medical community. We talk about all sorts of insecurities, food insecurity, lack of insurance, et cetera, et cetera. I don't really think that we talk about menstrual equity at all. And while people talk about problems that they have with menstruation and we help people deal with their menstruation, we don't, I think, ever go the extra step and ask about products. And it really started me thinking, I'll get to the landscape in 1 second. This conversation started me thinking, there are doctors in certain parts of the United States who are writing prescriptions for food. They're writing prescriptions for people who they know have food insecurity to get food. They'll write a prescription and say here, and they'll go to a certain area, whether it's in the hospital or someplace else, to be able to get food. Perhaps we need to start doing that for menstrual products. That just came to me today. Perhaps we need to figure out a way to do that. what is the landscape? So I looked up some facts and figures. In New York City, there are 4.5 million women approximately between the ages of 15 and 49. So that's your reproductive age group. It's about equal men and women. However, when you lay on top of that, that women are more likely to live in poverty, right? About 18% of all women are in poverty in New York City. They are about 19% more likely than a man to be in poverty. And when you put on top of that, that Black and Hispanic women are more likely to be in poverty with their children, then the scope of the problem then just becomes really wide. You know, I'm not sure how much of the audience is aware, Black women have more fibroids than other women. Fibroids and other gynecologic issues can oftentimes make one have more frequent menstruation, make women bleed for longer periods of time. And right now, we're just talking about menstrual products to actually deal with the bleeding from menstruation. We're not talking about people dealing with other symptoms that may go along with that, such as headaches, pain, cramps, you name it, days lost from work, etc. And so the problem really just can escalate. I know your next question is going to,
Yeah.
I'm psychic.
Yeah.
Is going to touch on what happens when people don't have the correct products and the sanitary use of products. And it really can lead to chronic health issues. You might see someone have more frequent urinary tract infections, certainly vaginal infections. We deal very frequently with yeast infections and something called bacteriovaginosis, which is a lot of bacteria in the vagina. And so putting unclean products or keeping products against your skin that may not allow for the proper discharge to happen or, you know, breathability, et cetera, really can set someone up for some problems and may require more frequent use of antibiotics, antifungal medications, et cetera. And for someone who may not be able to get medical care, these problems may really become long-standing. The other more serious problem that we think about is toxic shock syndrome. So if someone has a tampon or other, you know, things that they might be inserting and not removing in a timely manner and allowing for I mean, I think I need to just level set a little bit, and hopefully no one's had a recent lunch or dinner or anything. The bacteria, you know, the vagina in its normal state has bacteria in it, and those are good bacteria, and there are some bad bacteria, but usually they kind of interplay off each other, and for most people, a normal vaginal homeostasis is a warm, moist environment that has some bacteria in it. That is the normal state, and that is fine, and that is okay. And people can have discharge, and usually it's called physiologic discharge, which just means it's normal, and a little bit is okay. The problem is when we start to change what normal might be and have foreign objects, or perhaps have, like you said, if people are using different types of materials to help soak up the menstrual blood. That might be newspapers or rags that they might find, or reusing things and not being able to clean them in the proper manner, then that really can perhaps set someone up for some serious health concerns.
Yeah. Carrington, I wanted you to chime in. Have you ever seen issues escalating because of the lack of products?
Not that I've seen, but really what I've heard. Like
Right,
honestly,
right.
I've read articles about it, and then also like the video I first watched, and I watched some more after it as well. That it does become an issue. Like Dr. Wilcox was mentioning, like using newspapers or even socks or rags or anything of that nature is often what it does happen after you run out of products, or even I've seen like women building almost a tampon out of toilet paper, like wrapping it very tightly and inserting that, of course, to soak up as much blood as possible. So it is definitely happening, and it's something that probably should be figured out because it's not the safest probably method of collection for period blood.
Yeah. I found Dr. Wilcox's proposal to prescribe period products so fascinating. Jennifer, what do you think of that?
I love that. I was starting to lean over, actually, look at Congresswoman Meng and think about how that could interface with the Medicaid coverage, because that actually might thread that needle. So we should all talk about that, because we could write that into the bill. And it's interesting because I've when you start doing policy work, you kind of think of lawmakers as your first stop. But it was actually, I think about when we originated the New York City laws that you referenced with the then council member, Julissa Ferris Copeland. We were really determined then in 2015 to bring a really wide variety of voices to the table, because this is not the kind of thing that a law drafter or a lawmaker. No, you really do need to understand from the people who are impacted how it's playing out. And it wasn't just any one avenue. We thought about having, we brought physicians in, we brought folks from the Prison Association, and we brought folks from the after-school programs in. You name it, you think about it, every corner of life that women and girls touch is who you need to talk to, because there's not a special interest group going on here. It's half the people in this room right now. So anyway, all of which is to say that some of the most extraordinary policy ideas have come from having a talk in a synagogue, or talking, or especially talking with physicians. So it's yes, that's my long-winded way of saying that's a great idea, and we should talk about how that'll weave together.
Yeah, you heard it here first. It's gonna happen. I think that's a good note to open it up to questions from the audience. Yes.
Hi, I'm Orlandi. I'm a journalist. I'm from Caribbean Life in Politic, New York, so I will be covering this event. But I do have a question for Dr. Wendy. I was just wondering, sorry. Oh, it's not on?
I think it's on.
Oh, you can hear me? Okay. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on the fibroid issues. That's the statistic.
Sure.
With African American or Black women, because you mentioned that they're more likely to diagnose of that.
Fibroids are more commonly found in women of African descent. We
Okay.
still do not know. So just to explain what fibroids are benign growths that originate in the uterus. They can originate in different locations. So if it's, there's some that come in the lining that might cause more bleeding, and there's some that are kind of on the outside of the uterus that may not bother people. We generally don't have to do anything about fibroids. They don't necessarily cause cancer or increase risk. However, if they start to cause problems, such as if they grow really large or if they create a lot of bleeding, then we have to intervene sometimes. And there are different ways that we might intervene. Sometimes it's as simple as just regulating someone's menstrual cycle, perhaps with contraceptives or hormones, right? Sometimes surgery might be required. If someone is older and menopausal, we might think of removing the entire uterus. That would be a hysterectomy. If it's someone who still wants to retain their childbearing capacity, a younger woman, someone who still wants to have children and be fertile, then something called a myomectomy. There are different options. I'm not going to go through the whole whatever. So, however, when they occur, they can grow into the lining and have someone have irregular menstrual cycles. Sometimes people with fibroids have heavier bleeds, longer bleeds, irregular bleeds. And so because they're more likely to occur in Black women, it may compound the problem. That is what I was trying to say.
Okay, so why do you think it's more likely to be found in Black women? Why?
There are many people who have studied fibroids for a really long time. Sometimes they think there might be a familial genetic component, but they haven't really nailed down the cause of fibroids yet.
Okay,
There might
thank
be
you.
environmental in terms of diet. We're not really sure.
Before we go to the next question, I just want to say Congresswoman Meng has to leave. Thank you so much for your time here. That was excellent having you here, and yeah.
Thank you. I
Best
just
of
want
luck
to
with the bill,
apologize.
the
I
act.
have to head to something else, but I do want to thank everyone for putting together this event. And just sort of in closing, I first learned about this issue, the seventh grader that wrote to me, because she was also learning that people in homeless shelters were requesting these items, and because of the federal grants that New York City shelters were getting, they were not allowed to buy and distribute these products. And so under then President Obama, we were able to change the regulations and the types of grants received. So now, for example, this seventh grader made it possible for people in homeless shelters to be able to receive this. So yes, we will work on, there's lots of ideas. I have some homework, but thank you everyone for your great work. Keep in touch.
Yeah, next question.
Hi, so we are a food bank member organization, and I just wanted to ask, what would you recommend in eliminating the stigma and kind of opening up those conversations so that we can assess the community need, and I guess try to start distributing more healthcare products in our regular pantry distribution?
Is this for me?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I just wasn't sure. Well, I mean, so kind of the approach we're taking as an organization is really starting with the education piece. I feel like that's the biggest piece right there, because by starting this organization, I've learned more about my period in the last 2 years than I did for the first 8 years that I menstruated. So I feel like that's the biggest way to really actually start addressing the stigmas, is just really talking about it, normalizing having the conversation. Like, you shouldn't be shy about saying, like, yeah, I'm on my period. Like, that's the first step there. And then really and truly, it's, I guess, more or less, we as a society should become more open about, like, having the conversation with men as well, and not just among women. I mean, like Dr. Wilcox said, like, men are just, there's half men, half women everywhere, pretty much. And that's something that I feel like we kind of leave them out of the conversation, because it is like a female process to menstruate, but they're just as much as a part of it, because they also have given us the kind of helped contribute towards the concept of, like, menstruation is, I guess, bad. I don't know. I'm fumbling over my words. I'm sorry. But essentially, men are much as part of this conversation as women should be, and that can really help us with actually having the conversation to end the stigmas, and then also just allowing young people to ask the questions that I wish I could have asked when I was younger. I wish I could have known more about possible reproductive health diseases that I could have been, have. And then also, I wish I would have known more about just, like, how to properly clean your vagina, because no one tells you. You kind of figure it out on your own. So it's just a lot of things that we can start from a young age with educating them could really help us long term in the future.
I should add, every now and then I will test my husband, and I'll say, why do you think we need super tampons versus regular tampons?
Hi, my name is Daphne, and I first wanted to say that I'm just so impressed with the work that you all have done to advance menstrual equity. So thank you so much for that. And so I work with a nonprofit called Could You, dedicated to ending period poverty. Could You has been distributing menstrual cups to disadvantaged communities globally and in New York, because as we all know, where there is food insecurity, there is period poverty. So our FDA registered cup is $10, lasts 10 years, and is zero waste. And so really, we would just really like to be able to donate our Could You Menstrual Cup to the Food Bank's Woman to Woman campaign and get more involved. Thanks. But yeah, so we're currently working with Councilmember Amanda Farias and the Women's Caucus to expand the definition of the menstrual hygiene product to include the menstrual cup. And we're also in conversation with Congresswoman Meng about the same issue. So again, thank you so much for your hard work, and really looking forward to continuing these conversations and becoming more involved in this campaign.
Actually, I have a question for you. If in your distribution of menstrual cups, does it require a little more education and perception change around it?
Well, I think that it, I mean, like every period product, every period product is a little bit different and works with women's bodies a little bit different. So just that basic instruction and education is, different, but ultimately it is it's just such a sustainable product, and is more accessible than some other period products due to its price and how long it lasts. And so even though there might be a little bit of a perception shift in knowing what it is and knowing how to use it, I think there's some fear around it. But that's why it's so important to be talking about it and to try to change the language that we use around period products to include the cup, especially when it comes to Medicaid and policy change.
I mean, I think a lot of cultures see even tampons, and this is true of my background too, they see tampons as removing your virginity or taking away your virginity. And so I just imagine the cup is, a little more of a leap than a tampon.
Definitely, and that makes sense. And I think culturally, in many communities, it does feel that way. So yeah, we all need to be talking more about periods and menstruation to get on the same page. And yeah.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Karisu, and my daughter and I, Marisol, we founded an organic feminine care line. We would love to donate. It's organic pads, panty liners, and we want to get more involved because we like the conversation. And for me, it's always been like a taboo to talk about menstruation, especially growing up in the Caribbean. Parents don't really discuss those kind of things. So for me, especially also too, being a victim of fibroids and doing my research like 3 years ago, I didn't even know what period poverty was. And it was so enlightening to really be able to be a part of something that can empower women and kids all over the world. And I feel like even somebody mentioned earlier about men being involved. My daughter and I came up with a journal to explain what period is, what the menstruation is to dads, because we have to understand too that sometimes there are homes where it's single dads, and they need to be able to have this conversation. And if they're afraid to have this conversation, we've came up with a tool that makes it easier for them to just be like, okay, I may not totally understand, but here's a guide that can really teach you what you need to know. So it's good that we have forums like these where we all can come together and blend ideas on how to make period poverty go away, because it's something that can go away. If we all help each other, each one teach one, then we can bring a solution to this stigma. And I also wanted to know, Dr. Wilcox, about how you suggested prescribing menstrual products. So can you just enlighten me a little bit more on how that process would work?
This was an idea that just floated into my brain from this conversation. What I said is that there are some places, not in New York, I don't think, but there are some hospitals that are experimenting with writing prescriptions for food for people who have food insecurity. And if that could work, then perhaps we could build a process with menstrual products that would work for, with this situation. Because we do write prescriptions for other things that are not medications, sometimes for durable medical equipment. If someone needs a wrist immobilizer, or, do you know what I'm saying? Like, so I'm thinking to myself, why couldn't we do this?
Well, and it's really interesting to broaden the conversation because, as was mentioned earlier, SNAP doesn't include menstrual products, and in part it's because SNAP is food stamps it's an agricultural program. It's rooted in the Great Depression, and it was actually created to ensure that farmers had a way to sell their crops. But for a whole, sort of century of history, even though we now think about food stamps as something that you use in a grocery store or a convenience store, where you would also be buying menstrual products at the same time, because you don't do your you don't shop for different things, you just do it all under one roof. There's not a lot of logic to the way we look at it, even though that is the genesis of the law. So there's a lot of reimagining to do. It's funny, because when people ask the SNAP question, like, why isn't that the policy agenda? There are really practical reasons why it's not just its agricultural roots, but the way the policy is structured. There's a reauthorization every 5 years, and it's a pretty rigorous process, and it will be a lot harder to get menstrual products swept into SNAP, which are insufficient benefits in any event, than it is to do all these other things that have been pursued, which is part of why that's not been a key agenda item, even though it would be potentially a useful policy outcome. But the bigger piece of the story is we have all of these structures that don't match the way we live our lives. And that is part of what also this idea of menstrual equity, when we think about equity, what is it we're reimagining? It's reimagining the entire systems and structures by which we live.
And then also, I have a quick question. I'm not sure, because like I'm from the South originally, so I'm not sure if it's here. But like the WIC program, like women and like children, would it possibly be like looped in there? if
I've
diapers are
tried so hard.
included?
So I've gone to the WIC folks. So interestingly, baby diapers aren't included in WIC. So therefore, menstrual products become a pretty big leap. And the menstrual education that comes with WIC.
Wait. But diapers are not included?
No.
It's just like food.
It's nutrition. It's a nutrition program for. You could probably speak more fluently to
So,
the parameters of WIC, but I'll
women's-
go back to the menstrual piece after you
Infants
do.
and Children Nutrition Program is what WIC is. And my concern, you can talk about it, but my concern with WIC is that it really only covers you for a certain period of time. And this is a problem that theoretically could persist from the time someone is 12 until 55, right? And so to just sandwich this in just a tiny little program that serves women in the postpartum period and children up to, I'm not sure what age, probably
5.
age 5, thank you, is not really going to address the problem wholeheartedly, I don't think.
On the other hand, though, it actually posed an opportunity to talk about not just menstruation, but bleeding over the course of one's life. And I think we have a tendency to sort of get stuck thinking about schools and thinking about certain avenues for menstrual product distribution. And it's a really important discussion to have more broadly just about what our bodies do. And the idea that there is excessive or extreme bleeding after childbirth, it's not novel to WIC employees, but it's novel to legislators who are at the helm of these programs, who don't know anything about our bodies and wouldn't know that a person needs, 6 weeks perhaps worth of mattress-size pads to wear after childbirth, which again is part of the education I think we all want to be behind.
True, but I would say, yeah, I am agreeing with you and
I agree with you and trust me.
When someone is just starting to menstruate, that's
Yes.
a period of great irregularity in the period, right? Until your body figures out what it's doing and gets it straight. That could be over certain years. And then in the perimenopausal age range.
Back to those
perimenopausal
mattress
women,
pads.
Yes, is a really, you have women in their 40s and 50s who are losing a great deal of time potentially from work and just bleeding out volumes of blood. It could be quite frightening.
There was a woman who was fired from her job for excessive bleeding during perimenopause on her chair on account of destroying office equipment by staining the chair. So there's a legal and policy agenda that needs to be pursued across all fronts.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I
Yes.
published a piece on Friday that it was about a Mayo Clinic study that women lose $1.8 billion a year of lost hours and days because of menopause. Because
Was
of
that
the
your
transition.
piece?
Yeah.
Oh, we need to talk.
The transition to menopause. And, you know, it was an 800-word piece, but there are 600 more comments in there of women being like, yep, I couldn't even get back from the office to home to change my pants. And, you know, it's unexpected. I don't know how to deal with it. It's a real problem. Yeah.
And also, like, I will say, when it comes to menopause, like, obviously I'm not there yet, and I even like just started talking to my mom about it, and I was just not even understanding what she was going through when she was going through menopause, because she was like, sorry mom, I know you're watching, sorry to share your business, but she said she was like going through, I think, like a super tampon and a super pad like in 2 or 3 hours. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, how do you get through your day at that point when you're going through that? And that's also something that none of us know about. You don't know about menopause till you get to menopause, it seems like. And even then, the experience seems to be so different when I talk to other women who are going through it.
I mean, I've had patients who, you know, friends, colleagues, self, who have gone through, you know, wearing tampons and multiple tampons and pads just to get through a day of work.
Just to get through a half hour. Okay,
Exactly.
raising my hand here. Hence, period, full stop, The Politics of Menopause is the next book that's coming out.
Okay.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Faith Anderson. I'm currently a freshman at Medgar Evers College. I would like to speak to you about the book and also the menopause thing privately, but also when I had my first period, I was in middle school, so I didn't know anything about it. But when throughout the years, I realized that periods are so bad to the point that you can't get up. For me, I can barely get up or survive throughout the day in school because how painful it is. Sometimes to the point I even throw up or might pass out. So my question is, why does I will say the workplace can I know they can't emphasize because they're not women themselves, but at the same time, how can we work under these conditions? Because I can barely walk. I can barely move when I'm on my period, this and that, and yet they deduct my pay due to the fact I have to run home, come back, and change because I messed up some chair and I'm getting fired for it. That doesn't make any sense. I just want to point that out there.
It doesn't. And honestly, like, I feel like the United States is so behind in so many different ways. I think a few countries are possibly looking into giving you like sick days almost for your period, which I think is very valid. Like, yeah,
Spain.
yes, exactly. And it's just like that's a very honestly, it's like being sick for some people. It is. It's like you're in a lot of pain, and then you also have to pretend you're not in pain. Like I've been at work before, like doubled over, like trying to catch my breath, and then like a man comes up, starts to talk to me, and I'm like, yeah, what's up? Like you just turn it on almost, and it was like we shouldn't have to do that. I feel like, but unfortunately, the people who are most of the time in charge are men, so they don't understand what we're going through. And because no one's talking about it, they will never understand, which is why we have to start talking about it more, and hopefully it can change in the future.
Yeah, as you stated, the education piece is so important because, you know, as young teenagers, we don't talk about how maybe some things are not normal with your period.
Yes.
And how, you know, culturally, you're not taken to the GYN when you're young, when you get your period, and there's all these issues. And then, you know, the whole endometriosis and how it's diagnosed, and you can have these severe cysts and fibroids that are affecting you, and you don't find out till years later when you're having, you know, more pelvic issues. So I think starting that conversation with our young girls in health class is so important to say, hey, it's not normal to be throwing up and like doubled over and not being able to go to school. Maybe you should see your primary care, or maybe you should go to GYN or go to the health, you know, the public health clinics and stuff.
Exactly. And it's also like a lot of what we've been doing is struggling in silence pretty much. We're all going through the same things, kind of, for the most part, but it's just been, we've kept it to ourselves, unfortunately, and now it's hopefully going forward, we'll start kind of struggling together in a way, which is not the best, but at least we're in this together and we can start talking about experiences that are not normal and also experiences that may just be like, gosh, like, yeah, this sucks, like period poops, for instance. I know no one wants to talk about it, but they exist pretty much, and they are not the best. So it's definitely going forward. Hopefully the education and then normalizing the conversation can help us a lot.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm currently 17, and throughout my time in the education system, I did have the privilege of like taking classes where they did tell me what a period was and what like some things to expect. But just listening to this conversation, I found that a lot of what I learned was just like the tip of the iceberg. I had no idea about like yeast infections and bacterial vaginosis and those kind of things. So I was wondering, like in the time being while we're like developing policies to instate more education in schools, like how can you teach yourself about like periods and menopause and what we go through eventually throughout life as a woman?
That's a good question.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I'm pretty sure there used to be a curriculum around this about health education in New York City. I think New York City Department of Health had that. However, my knowledge is from about a decade ago, so whether or not that's the Department of Education or somebody, but I would think that there would be curricula around that.
And
Well, I was going to say, I think there's sort of two answers. That advocacy for really effective, accurate information is a very important way to engage civically. But in terms of answering the questions here and now, I would recommend just resources like Our Bodies Ourselves, which is, a more than 50-year-old nonprofit organization that has been dedicated to this kind of information, since 1971. And they have a website, and it's very user friendly, and it's very searchable. And I've worked with folks at Columbia University School of Public Health that have really extraordinary guides around menstruation and puberty. They're maybe less informative about some of the menstrual health issues that emerge over the course of a person's lifetime. But those are at least the two that come to my mind quickly that are useful for the here and now. But urge folks to, if you want to be a civically engaged person on this, that's a really reasonable request to make of your city government.
I actually want to, that brings me to another thought of, how are periods portrayed culturally, where you would watch TV. You don't really get accurate information from that either. It's seen as really scary, as like the most horrific thing to ever happen to you. Yeah. And even in period product ads, the liquid is not even red, so it's inaccurate. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on the cultural conversation around periods?
I mean, I will say there is a new movie. It's a Pixar movie. It's Disney. Turning Red, pretty much, I guess, was about periods, but it's also, like you said, that was kind of scary if you really think about it. She was turning into this big, like, monster, pretty much. Yeah, and it was just like, okay, that's kind of cute and fluffy, I guess, but it made it seem like periods were the worst thing ever. And you rarely see it on TV. I think it's getting better, but also it's like when you do see it on TV, it's because someone bled through their pants and they're like, people are laughing at them or something like that. So it's kind of like, it's a negative expression of it, I feel like, and they do need to change it. But I mean, other than that, I don't really because like for me, talking about my period was very normal at home. So I really didn't encounter having to be quiet and stuff. But within my team, like we've had conversations and we've all like hearing each other's stories has been something that's been like, wow, I didn't even know you were going through this. And also I didn't even know you're like, because of your cultural background, you're going through this as well, because you're not the only one. And I feel like that's kind of where we kind of started doing this thing where we actually just kind of chat with each other. Like really just sharing experiences really helps and educates each other. It's not your like textbook education, but it's still like hearing the experiences firsthand is very helpful. And also, like, oh, maybe I'm experiencing this because I have the same symptoms. Now I should go to the doctor and figure this out now. So there's a lot of different ways, I guess, you could have the conversation and make it comfortable for people to actually talk about different things.
Overall, I think culture is extremely important. Media is important. Your role as a reporter. And I found actually that the media, in terms of at least the the policy piece of it, has reported on it in such robust and respectful ways over the course of this, now coming up on a decade, that really, really helped to normalize the conversation. But it's not just the media, journalism that we consume. It's the TV shows we watch. It's the books that we read. It's what's happening on social media. And we all have a stake in that. We can all applaud and give positive feedback when we see TV shows that do it right or celebrities that do it right. And when Tiger Woods hands somebody a tampon to imply that they were a less than stellar golf player, we can all call him out and say that that's, what we think of that. So we all have voices to raise here, but there's nothing that we do politically or socially that the popular culture shouldn't and isn't part of. It's a mirror, and it's also an opportunity to reflect what we really want to see.
Do you have a favorite cultural reference?
Well, you ask that at a very special week, because I do have a favorite cultural reference that I'm still sort of walking on air about. So I'm not 22. I have a 22-year-old daughter. I'm 55. I was born in 1967, and the first book that I read about periods was Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. So yeah, it's kind of a pretty big week for Judy Blume fans. I actually threw a Judy Blume party on Friday night. It was called Menopause Needs Our Margaret. And we had a panel of menopause experts, and we also had the directors of the documentary film that's now out about her life called Judy Blume Forever. So they were participated in it, and we actually linked everything from book banning to pop culture to menopause to politics to democracy in this conversation. Those are pretty much all my favorite things on this planet. But yeah, that's created a huge opportunity to have these conversations, because that book is clearly such an iconic experience for so many people. So that's one of my favorites.
Sorry to interrupt. We have time for one more question.
Hi, so I just want to say thank you. This is an amazing panel. And also, I guess a double thank you. My name is Ariella. I work with the Queensborough president. We just launched our first ever period product drive using data from Food Bank. So thank you so much for your leadership there. And so my question is two-tiered. Is there data that we can refer to on what happens and how many people use those unhygienic products because they have to, and the impact of that, people who are using things like socks or newspapers? And then secondly, is there data on the impact of the stigma on menstruation? Because I know that for people who live with chronic illness, people who live with the stigma and feel the impact of stigma and have a lack of social support, they feel the illness worse than people who have strong social support. So is there any data we can rely on, especially those of us who have the ability to maybe, further the conversation or provide the public service here? Is there anything that we can kind of refer to? Thank you.
I'm glad to jump in with a it's a typical lawyer answer. That's not an answer. There's limited data, because this wasn't a problem that reached the public eye in this country until really the past decade or so. So there's some catching up to do. There is some data out there, and I'm happy to sort of share resources after from George Mason University, from Washington University in St. Louis. I just want to throw out a caveat that this is going to maybe be a little controversial, but there are some menstrual product companies that have been behind data too, and I just want to throw out a warning to be a little wary of those. I'm much more interested in academic data than I am in purchased Harris polls that are used for promotional opportunities. So just putting that out there, as you Google and you find certain stats and data, look who's behind it.
And I also wonder if the data that has been collected, and I came across the same problem when I was researching for this panel too. There's very little out there. And the data that is out there is based on very small samples. And I suspect there is a large number of underreporting too, because like we're talking about here, people don't talk about their periods very openly. So it's also the quality of the data is, I'm not sure reliable.
Yeah, then also there's like this may not be the best, but it is like I guess a source. It's Alliance for Period Supplies is an organization that pretty much supplies like organizations like mine essentially with period products, and they really report more on who is experiencing period poverty and based on state as well, which is kind of cool. I've looked into it. I haven't looked into who made the research yet though, so I do need to actually see about that part. But that right, they have that I guess resource as well to see like who is experiencing period poverty in your area possibly, and that's a good place to start in a way, so you can really figure out okay, how is this really impacting people that I see possibly on a daily basis.
What was the other part of your question?
I wanted to say that we actually used Alliance for Period products to realize that there was no program in Queens to supply products, so that's why we did our initiative in March, and we're going to continue doing it. And then the other part of the question was the data on hygiene, like the issues around using unhygienic products, because I think that would add urgency to the situation. Is there anything we can rely on besides like testimony from psychologists and people who work directly with people?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, unfortunately. Maybe someone can do it.
Okay.
I think that's a good note to end on. They are shutting down the library, so we all have to get out of here. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, panelists, for this fantastic conference.